Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. Today, I have a very special guest, Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar, who actually many of you already know. So I will first of all probably have Tal to say hi to everyone.
Hi, how everyone. It's so good to be here.
Wonderful. Tal, you're joining us from East Coast of the States, right?
Exactly from New Jersey.
All right. Thank you for staying up late. So Tal, just a brief intro. I know again, many of you already know who he is, and his courses are widely known in China as well. He himself holds a master in psychology and then later a PhD in philosophy and organizational behavior from Harvard. And then he actually became a lecturer in Harvard, and in a way, it's a legend because his course is among the most popular. His courses are called Positive Psychology and then Psychology of Leadership. They were voted among Harvard's most popular, and earning him the recognition as one of the university's most beloved lecturers as well. Not only is it popular, it also changed many lives. In his book, he actually talked about how the first year I remember was you have like 10 students or something, and then when it becomes public, you have like 800 signing up, and in many of them after the course and said how seems to be a simple and almost superficial term of pursuing happiness, but through the course really changed the way they conduct themselves, the way they are, and then of course the quality of life. So thank you so much for all the work you've been doing for decades, and also thank you for this talk for the audience in China to have a chance to hear from you directly. All right. So with that, I think we'll probably start with a bit of a tough question. So far, when people talk about happiness, it became, of course, on the one hand, nobody would be objected, right? Who doesn't want to be happy? But on the other hand, it feels like, it's so hard, especially now. I think many people are looking at the world, the geopolitics, the economy and all that, everybody become more worried. So like in this kind of times, um, how do we really talk about happiness?
Yeah. It's a very important question and a very difficult question because people have become quite cynical
Hmm.
about happiness. Levels of depression and anxiety are at an extremely high level today, whether it's in China or the United States or Europe or Australia. So around the world. And to talk about happiness seems maybe insensitive.
Hmm.
But here is the thing that's important to keep in mind. And, the founder of positive psychology is Professor Martin Seligman. And when he introduced this field back in 1998, most people, including professors, academics in psychology, thought that if we look at the human experience on a continuum, and let's say in the middle we have the zero, which is we're doing okay, not great, not bad, but okay, that's the zero. On the one side, we have the positive experiences. We have joy and love and happiness and excitement. And on the other side of the zero, we have depression and anxiety and frustration and anger. So we have the positive and the negative side. And positive psychology, we believed, only deals with that which lies on the positive. So if you're at a three doing well, you can do even better with positive psychology. If if you're happy, you can become even happier if you focus on positive psychology. But it has no meaning and it doesn't help when it comes to anxiety and depression and frustration and anger. But what research showed was that that's not the case. In fact, when we focus on happiness, when we increase levels of well being, when we focus on our strengths, when we cultivate gratitude, when we enjoy better relationships, yes, it helps the positive and we go from a three to a five. But what it also does is it helps us better deal with the negative. In
Mm,
other words, we become more resilient, better able to deal with anxiety, better able to deal with sadness, better able to deal with anger and frustration. In other words, the science of happiness does not only increase levels of well being on the positive side, it also helps us deal with all those emotions and experience we associate with the negative side.
hmm
And that's why happiness is important today, possibly more than ever.
mm. Yeah. And then in your books, you also actually talked a lot about models, and I love those models. This one talk about how spiral is that a spirit, right? Is it spirit or spiral? The
Spire.
acronym of the five components. Spire, right? And then can you talk a little about it? Like what I mean, if people agree, okay, that's great. It helps both to be more positive, and especially when it gets to negative, it helps me to almost lessen the suffering, right? But
Exactly.
but yeah, but in terms of how, I think that's where people struggle. Can you say a bit about the models you've laid out in your books?
Yes, for sure. Because you see, most people have a misunderstanding of what happiness is.
Hmm
Most people basically equate happiness with pleasure. They
hmm
would say, I ate ice cream, made me so happy. I got a new pair of shoes. This is happiness. Uh, it's not. It's pleasure, but it's not happiness. Happiness is a
hmm
much more complex and multi-dimensional construct.
hmm
Specifically, if you look at the works of the great minds throughout history, and you go all the way back to Lao Tzu and Confucius and Aristotle and Plato and Helen Keller and Sonia Lubomírsky and Marty Seligman, you can see that happiness comprises, includes five different elements. Not just pleasure. Pleasure is one, but five different elements. And they are the five SPIRE elements. The S of SPIRE stands for spiritual well-being. Spiritual
hmm
well-being is about finding a sense of meaning and purpose in life. Whether it's in our work that we find meaningful, whether we find a hobby that
hmm
provides us with a sense of purpose, relationships that are meaningful to us. So that's one element of spiritual well being. The second element of spiritual well being is being present, being mindful.
hmm
And we can experience that through meditation, through Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, listening to music, and being focused on the here and now. So, this is spiritual well being. That is an important element of a happy life. That's the
hmm
S of SPIRE. The P of SPIRE stands for physical well being. Physical well being is about exercising. You know that regular physical exercise has the same effect on our psychological well being as our most powerful psychiatric medication. In fact, it works in the same way. It releases norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine. These are all the feel good chemicals in the brain. So, being physically active is key to happiness. In addition,
Is
what
it?
we eat matters matters a great deal for happiness. Taking rest, recovery, whether it's sleep, whether it's time off in general, matters a great deal for physical well-being and for happiness as a whole. Third, we have intellectual well-being. Intellectual well-being is about being curious. It's about asking questions. One of my favorite parts of the Analects of Confucius
hmm
revolves around Confucius going into a temple and asking everyone questions. And two people behind Confucius say to each other, they say, the master is asking too many questions. This is not good form. And Confucius responds to it and says, no, no, no. Asking questions, that is good form. And that's a
Hmm.
very important message, not just for learning, not just for being a better person or a better leader,
Hmm.
also for happiness. So being
Hmm.
curious, asking questions, learning, deeply engaging with text. You know, all my students, whether we're talking about the master's degree students in happiness studies or the certificate program or the PhD program that we're launching soon, they
Hmm.
all read the great works of the ancient Chinese sages. They read the Tao Te Ching, they
Hmm.
read the Analects, they read the Great Learning, and they don't just read it once. They engage with it, they deeply engage with the text. And this
Hmm.
kind of learning contributes not just to wisdom, also to happiness.
Hmm.
In addition to intellectual well being, there is relational well being. The number one predictor of happiness is quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us. You know, one of the reasons why I love visiting China so much is because of the values, and specifically the value of friendships and family. These contribute a great deal to our overall happiness. In addition, being kind, being generous. You know, the Confucian idea of Ren is central for a happy life. And then the fifth element of SPIRE is emotional well being. You know, here Lao Tzu can teach us a lot because Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching talks about how important it is to be like water. Water flows. And if there is something in the way of water, it simply goes around it and continues to flow. And this is the way we need to treat our emotions. Allow our emotions to flow like water. So if I feel sadness, I can block it and say, I don't want to be sad. I shouldn't be sad. But that's actually harmful for our happiness. If we allow our emotions to simply flow like water, then we are in a better place, better position to deal with them.
Hmm.
Moreover, it's not just about dealing with painful emotions, it's about cultivating pleasurable emotions like joy, like gratitude, like love. So these are
Yeah.
the five elements of SPIRE of a happy life: spiritual well being, which is meaning and mindfulness, physical well being, which is about exercise, nutrition, recovery, intellectual well being, which is about asking questions and deep learning, relational well being, which is about spending quality time with friends, family. It's about being kind and generous. And finally, emotional well being, learning to deal with painful emotions and cultivating pleasurable emotions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for laying out so clearly. So again, in the book, this is from one of the books that Tao has written called Happier No Matter What. And the Chinese name is 幸福的要素。大家可以在直播间看到这本书。And then basically talk about those five models. And what I really like about, because I flipped through the book, and thank you again for putting such great work outside, is not only it talk about what it is, they also have a lot of tools to do self-assessment, right? To assess, okay, where I am against this. I know because many of our audience don't have those books in front of them yet. Hopefully they will soon after they get a copy for themselves. But Tel, do you mind giving people a sense like, okay, I think this five is beautiful. I think most people can comprehend what it means. And it feels like, okay, that's a full circle. But how do I know how am I doing against some of them? Can you give us an example? How do one do one assessment in one of those dimensions?
Yeah. Um, so let's take, for example, spiritual well being.
Hmm.
Um, do I feel that I'm present, whether it when I'm in a conversation or when I'm reading a book or doing my schoolwork or in the business? Or do I constantly feel distracted? Now, Daniel Goleman, who is famous for his work on emotional intelligence, has called our age, 21st century, the age of distraction.
Mhm.
Why? Because we are usually multitasking. Even, I'm sure many of our audience now, well, they're listening to us having a conversation and at the same time, probably, scrolling on the smartphone or maybe listening to music in the background or, probably eating, possibly eating at the same time. And that's okay. It's fine to multitask. What's not fine is to multitask all the time. And if our life mostly includes being distracted, that's not healthy. So we can ask ourselves, how much of my day am I present? Am I single tasking rather than multitasking? And if the answer is, well, most of the time I'm doing, 20 things at the same time, that's
Mm,
probably not healthy.
mm,
And what I should do then is focus more on specific things. So it could be maybe spend an hour reading, maybe take up Qigong, because when you're doing Qigong or meditation, you're being present. Introduce these ideas into your life. Or here's another question. Let's go over to relational well-being.
mhm.
The question is, am I spending quality time with family, friends, with people I care about and who care about me? Am I spending um, meals with family and friends? If you went to an average household in China 20 years ago, 200 years ago, 2000 years ago, what you would find in most households are families eating together, talking together, telling jokes, sharing, spending quality time together. Today, far fewer. And again, not just in China, just about everywhere in the world. You see more and more people. You go into restaurants, whether it's in Shanghai or New York. You go into restaurants, you see people sitting across from one another, and they're on the phone at the same time. That's not making the most of relational well-being. So we need to ask ourselves, am I doing this? And change our ways. Because ultimately, the most important thing after we assess where we are is engaging in practice. Whether it's starting a meditation practice, whether it's spending more quality time, technology free, with others, whether it's starting to exercise more regularly, whether it's reading and rereading the analects or a novel that you enjoy. It's putting these ideas into practice after the assessment that makes the difference. I tell all my students, I don't teach happiness for its theoretical value. Yeah, of course, I teach research and I teach philosophy, but ultimately it's all for one purpose: practical change.
Thank you. Yeah, again, for all our audience and readers, you can actually, the book has each one of the five elements, and you can do a self-assessment. And then I think once you do the self-assessment, the what to do is kind of apparent, right? So if you're not spending enough time with people, like, or, using Tal's example of having family dinner time, then probably do it. Um, And I will maybe ask the question on behalf of my audience because I hear this all the time. And they will say, "Oh, this all sounds right. I agree. It's hard to disagree with them." But I have so much going on in my life. Okay. So like the
Mhm.
reason I'm looking at my phone is because I need to, reply a message, from my work. Otherwise, my project is not going forward. So this is a common, I'm sure you hear a lot of this too, right? And then people say those are all the right things. But I'm sorry. Then, like I don't have that kind of luxury. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. Look, the world today is a lot more complex than it was in the past, and there are many more distractions, and we have many more commitments. So, if in the past, I was, either, going out and hunting or gathering food or growing, rice paddies. But I had, or taking care of a child. And there weren't as many distractions because, I couldn't put my, Walkman on or I couldn't, talk to my friend at the same time, even if I wanted to. So life was simpler. Um, Today, very often the demands of our work mean that we have to check our emails every, 20 minutes. So here I want to talk about a very important principle within the science of happiness. And that is that small changes make a big difference when consistently applied. So yes, in a perfect world, I would spend, 1 hour doing, the 120 Tai Chi movements, and then I would go to the gym and then go for a walk for an hour, and I would just focus on my work for 5 hours and do nothing else, and then I'd go home and have a wonderful meal with my family for an hour and a half without doing anything else. That's a perfect world. The world's not perfect. But even if in the crazy busy reality in which we live, I could take, you know, 10 minutes to do a Qigong session. And I could, go for a walk for, 30 minutes and be on the phone with a friend at the same time. That's okay. And then put my phone away for dinner with my family so that I can just have dinner with my family or with my best friend and multitask during other times throughout the day. That's a big change. That's a big change. So it's not all or nothing. It's not saying, okay, I can transform my life and live in an ideal manner. So I'll just live and conform to the great, crazy, busy world. No, small changes make a big difference. And, I want to give an even more extreme example. Let's say I don't have time to go to the gym or go out for a walk. And I'm working hard. Even if I take 1 minute, not an hour, 1 minute during every 2 hours. And during that 1 minute, I go out and climb up and down the stairs in my building for 1 minute. Or maybe I do push ups for 30 seconds. And after 2 hours, I do something else, but I move. And then maybe after an hour, I just take a quick break and I close my eyes and take 3 deep breaths. And I introduce these very small interventions regularly throughout my day. These small changes, if consistently applied, can make a very big difference in terms of my physical health and my mental health.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I think I was smiling inside because this, in a way, this is what I've been telling, like, people who read my stuff as well. I had recently put out one video saying that because I do grocery shopping, right? So like I have three
Yeah.
kids, take care of them. And then so like then sometimes I don't have time to go to the gym to do weight training. But if I have a grocery bag of, 5 kilos in there, yeah, you just do your triceps when you're walking. And people might laugh at you. It's like, oh, that's like, like random woman. Who cares, right? So I was like, I'm on my way walking back home from the supermarket. It doesn't hurt. And then you can do. There are many, many. If you pay attention, I love what you say. If you're aware of, something you want to do, and you look at your day of, awake hours, let's say 16 hours or, 18, there are many like little gaps, I would say, like you could use to do this. But one thing I find, again, this is all channeling my own audience's question. I think they're very powerful, lead us to great discussions, is that sometimes I think what people are missing is not the time. It's not like they don't have the 5 minutes. It's this mental detachment, right? So because when
Mm.
you're attached to your work, like all your mind is, under this highly stressful situation on this thing. Maybe you are sitting there for half an hour, you're not doing anything, but you have this inability to act. So I think the hard thing is having that awareness of detachment and saying that, yeah, then I can look at my day, look at my time schedule, or be aware of, oh, there's 5 minutes gap coming up. I could do three deep breaths. I think that's the hardest because when you have stress, it doesn't is in a way disabilitate you. Not because you don't have the time, but you don't think you can. You would rather probably just lie there or doing nothing, right? So like any advice for that situation? Because that's quite prevalent as well.
It's prevalent again everywhere, and it's the central issue around bringing about change. And I want to give you an example. So here is a question to our dear audience. Um, the question is, would you rather appreciate your loved ones, appreciate the good things in your life, be grateful for them, or would you rather take your loved ones or the good things in your life for granted? Now, this is a silly question. I don't think anyone in our audience or anyone in the world would say, I would rather take my loved ones for granted. I've appreciated them for so long. Enough. No one would say that, right? And yet, most people, most of the time, take their loved ones or generally the good things in their lives for granted. Why? Not because they're bad people, not because they're not smart. It's for a very simple reason, because they forget. Because we forget to appreciate. And we go about our day and we're busy at work, and then we are in the gym, and the end of the day comes and we haven't appreciated all the good things in our lives. And we know that we pay a very high price when we take the good things in our lives for granted. We know how it hurts relationships. We know how it hurts physical health. We know how important being grateful is for well-being, for success. And yet we forget. So what do we do about this? What do we do about this? As you said, what do about, we sit for half an hour and we could have just walked during that half an hour. It's not that hard. Or we could have taken 30 seconds. I mean, we all have 30 seconds to breathe deeply. Or we can easily right now get up and walk up and down those stairs. And yet we don't do it. Again, not because we don't know that it's important, not because we don't understand its value. It's because we forget. And what's the antidote to forgetfulness? Reminders. We need to create reminders in our life, in our environment, that will guide us towards the best version of ourselves, towards all these small interventions that, if consistently applied, lead to real meaningful difference. Now, what do these reminders look like? Well, we can use our phone. Technology is not all bad. Technology can be great. I mean, we're talking thanks to technology. Technology is great at reminding us things. Another way to remind ourselves is in our environment. I look at my wall now. Here I have a list of things that I want to be reminded of. Here I have pictures of people who inspire me to be the best version of myself, whether it's teachers, whether it's family, of course. Here I have a work of art that reminds me to rejoice, to be grateful. So I have all these reminders on the wall. Here on this side, I have quotes that are reminders. Another form of reminder, one of my favorites, is wearing a bracelet. I learned this one from Sarah Noram. She has a wonderful book. I'm not sure if it was translated into Chinese or not. I hope it was. It's called Appreciative Coaching.
Hmm.
Appreciative coaching. And what it's about, one of the stories that Sarah Noram tells is one of her clients, his name is Rory. And Rory became a manager. And he said to her that since he became a manager, he's been distracted all the time. He hasn't been present. And he says it's affecting his well-being, his health, his happiness. So she said to him to do the following. He was wearing a watch on his hand. She said to him, on your watch, with a pen, write the letter N. Write the letter N. Why N? Because N stands for now. So every time he looked, what time is it? Oh, it's now. It was a reminder to return to the present moment. And that changed his experience. So, I don't wear a watch, but I said I can wear a bracelet. So, I bought a cheap bracelet and I put it on whenever I'm working on something.
Hmm.
So, I'm not wearing it now, but for 30 days I was wearing it last up until 2 weeks ago. I was
Hmm.
wearing it. Why? Because I'd been traveling a lot and
Hmm.
I'd been exhausted, and I felt that I was impatient with my children. And I said, this is not the kind of father that they deserved. It's certainly not the kind of father I want to be. So I started wearing a bracelet simply to remind me to be kind, gentle, generous. Kind, gentle, generous. Now, do I know that it's important to be kind, gentle, and generous? Yes, I do. And everyone in the world knows that. That's easy. It's like knowing that I want to be appreciative and grateful. And yet, in the busyness and the craziness of life, we forget and we need
Hmm.
reminders. So whether it's the bracelet reminding us, whether it's something we write on the wall, whether it's our smartphone, we need those reminders that will guide us to be the best version of ourselves.
Hmm. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. I have this bracelet on. You see it? This is a very simple one, from my best friend. Like we've been friends for 20 years. And this like, it's probably like cost $2. It's very cheap. We
Yeah,
bought it in Southeast Asia. But I wear it exactly the same because I think that's, there are many things, meanings you can attach to it, right? So it can attach to
exactly.
relationship, you can attach to what, your original calling, you can attach it to being present at current times and all that. I love it. Yeah, I think our audience might be very curious what's around your the paintings you pointed to. But I agree. Like one thing uh, I say to my community as well, like when we have an online community of about 30,000 people, like there's a habit we do. It's very simple. Say like every day you say you point out three good things. Right?
Mm.
Like it's very simple, can be very simple. Okay, today I woke up on time, or today we had breakfast. Very simple things. But to your point, like because they happen all the time, or most of the time, you kind of forget about it, right? So you focus on the negative things because the good things, they should happen, right? I deserve them. But so like then our energy is like sharp focused on the few things that didn't work, but it becomes such a powerful mental habit. It's almost as a neural pathway you can imagine, right? Kind of gliding us to those negative things. I think what you were saying is that you have to kind of pull yourself up from it and then rebuild a different neural pathway and saying that, okay, how do you kind of recontext yourself, like in terms of what you have, how do you focus on now? And then those are things like when you're describing, I was saying, well, you're basically trying very hard, say, hey, let's build another pathway, not just, drop directly to the negativities, but look at the things you have and have a habit doing that.
This is exactly the process that we ought to lead ourselves, as well as whether it's our students or clients or children. And the process I describe as the 3 R's of change.
Hmm.
What are the 3 R's of change? The first R is reminders. And again, whether it's the bracelet or the watch or the smartphone or the wall, we need reminders. The second R is repetition. Because it's not enough to just remind myself once to be grateful and then I live happily ever after. Not enough. We need to do it again and again and again. Consistency, repetition is key to bring about change. And the third is exactly what you pointed to. And that is the third R, the ritual. Or another word for ritual is a habit. And what are rituals? What are habits? They're precisely what you pointed to, which is a deeply embedded neural pathway. So, everyone uh, with us today has neural pathways in their brain associated with brushing their teeth. Because as kids, mom reminded us, brush your teeth over and over again. Repetition. As a result of it, it became a ritual. I don't need my mom to tell me now to brush my teeth. It's already a habit. It's automatic because there are neural pathways that get me to do it every night and every morning. Or I'm sure we have in our audience people who play the piano. For them, there are neural pathways associated with playing certain pieces that they play off by heart. Their fingers move almost by themselves. Why? Because initially there was the reminder, the piano teacher, or the notes, the score was a reminder. They played it over and over again. And as a result of it, neural pathways were created. A ritual, the third R, a habit. And this applies to every skill we want to develop, whether it's music, whether it's sports, whether it's at work, whether it has to do with leading a happy life.
Beautiful. Yeah. I think it's easier. I was thinking it's the same thing as learning a foreign language. It's the same thing, right? So yeah, because the reason is because I'm learning Japanese now. I was like, wow, it's tough. But then you were saying, like, if you look at as you say, like, for people who grew up in a native language, they don't have to think. There's no effort. It doesn't mean like they didn't put effort before, but it become a ritual, as you say. It just comes out of your mouth
Automatic.
when you start saying, yeah. So it's almost rebuilding that. But I think it's easier to understand when you need to build this pathway when you're learning a skill. Like people get it when you're saying, okay, I'm learning piano, okay, now, or I'm learning jump rope, whatever. So people get it easier. I think it's much harder when it gets to conducting your life. I think that's right. That's a challenge. In a way, that's a much bigger, a much more important issue. But we seem to be kind of at loss of the skills I can use. So like there are so many
Mm,
courses on how to learn a foreign language, right? So and then how to play piano. But in terms of applying to our life, because I think sometimes the complexity daunts people. It was like, well, I can manage learning a piano. Oh, that even that sounds hard, right? For people who don't, play. But oh no, I need to do this for my entire life. Are you kidding me? So there is that I think there's that emotion, an emotion of fear, I would say, because people would be fearful, saying like, okay, I mean, life is so complex, so much uncertainty. I think the other thing about the fear is this uncertainty, right? So there are so much things like when we at the beginning of our conversation, well, I don't know how the economy is doing. I may lose my job, right? And then I have 3 kids growing up. Like I know how to feed them. Like there are many things in life that almost, you know, give many people a sense of being sort of disabled. Like, all those tools you talk about, I can pick it up if I'm learning piano. But if you talk about like how to face my life, I'm sorry, that's too hard.
mm. Yeah, and that the reason why so many people tend to neglect this area in their life is because subconsciously they have two standards. One standard for skills, such as piano or sports, and another standard for personal development.
Yeah.
Not realizing that personal development, cultivating happiness, is a skill like every other. So many people say to me, um, Tal, we've read your book. And I say, great. Or Tal, we watched your lecture. I say, that's wonderful. And, and the reason why I say it is because it's not enough. It's exactly like saying, I read the best book on playing the piano,
I
or
went to a concert,
I
right?
found this, yeah, exactly, or I found this bestseller on playing tennis, and it doesn't help unless you apply it, unless you practice it. It's the same for every skill. Why? Because ultimately, developing a skill has to do with what you pointed out, those neural pathways. How do we carve? How do we cultivate? How do we sculpt our brain? We do it through reminders, repetition. And that's when we get to creating healthy rituals.
Yeah.
It takes work.
I know. And I think for again, the 3 R's, right? Reminders, repetition, and ritual. And when it becomes ritual, then basically becomes effortless, right?
Exactly.
And then you can then develop new reminders for new areas and then
Yeah.
develop them. I think that's also what's lovely about your book, because your book has, I remember there was talking about all those tools. There's one thing I remember very clearly. I need to flip to the page, but you talk about in the physical health. I think if I remember clearly, you talk about this concept of micro recovery, right? And then like maybe can you share with us a few tools? Because again, do get a copy of the book, because it's full with not only sort of concepts, philosophy, scientific backed suggestions, but it also has a lot of kind of action oriented things you could do. I think micro
Yeah.
recovery is one. There's many other things. Like in each one of the five, you talk about anti-fragility and all that, all those ideas. Yeah, can you share with us, like what is the micro recovery you were talking about? Like what are the little things we could do?
So the micro recovery is helpful exactly for the reason you pointed out, and that is that many people are afraid of introducing change. Why? Because they think I'm so busy already. How am I going to fit all this, spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional well-being? That's overwhelming. It's too much. And the micro recovery and the research around micro recovery comes to show us what I spoke about earlier. And that is that small changes can and do make a big difference. So, for example, um, the number one reason why companies today invite me to speak is because of stress. They point to stress as the reason why employees are leaving their company. They point to stress as lowering performance levels. They point to stress as the cause of illness. And they're right. Stress does cause all these things and more. However, what people don't understand is that actually it's not the stress itself that's the problem. And let me give you an example. On a physical level, you go to the gym and you lift weights. What are you doing to your muscles? You're stressing them. Now, is that a bad thing when I stress my muscles in the gym by lifting weights? Not at all, because I'm stressing them. I lift weights, and maybe after 2 days, I go back to the gym. And 2 days after that, I go back to the gym. And, um, and that's how I grow stronger, healthier, better. Stress is not a problem. It's potentially good for us, whether it's physically or psychologically. When do the problems begin? The problems begin when I go to the gym and I lift weights, and then I lift more weights, and then I lift more and more and more without recovery. That's when I will get injured. That's when I will hurt myself. That's when I will become weaker rather than stronger. So the problem is not the stress. The problem rather is the lack of recovery. Now, recovery can come in different quantities. Yeah, we can have recovery take, a week off or 2 days off or an hour break. But recovery can also be very brief. So let's say I'm really stressed at work. Sure, I can take a vacation. That would be great. But what if I can't afford to take a vacation? Or what if I just come back from a vacation? Then I can also engage in micro recoveries. And a micro recovery can be that short 1 minute climbing up and down the stairs. That micro recovery can be those 3 deep breaths. Now, if I can go to the gym for an hour and recover from work or take a day off over the weekend, that's wonderful. However, even those micro recoveries, when I spread them across my day and week and life, they go a long way in helping turn this stress into growth. So stress without recovery leads to breakdown, to burnout. Stress with recovery, and again, whether it's micro or macro, stress with recovery leads to growth, whether it's physical or psychological.
Hmm. Perfect. I love it. Yeah, so it's nothing wrong with the stress, right? You have to have stress, but once you have recovery, become a component of growth.
Exactly. And you know that, raising children, stressful. 3 children, 3 times stressful.
9 times.
Right, it's exponential. So the challenge is not to avoid the stress, not possible. It's to introduce recovery.
Yeah. So I'm actually curious, since we talk about children, tell how many children do you have? How old are they?
Yeah, so we have 3 children,
Oh, three too.
and one is 20 years old. He's a student in Spain, an 18-year-old starting college next year, and we have a 16-year-old
Wow. Well,
boy.
similar to mine. Mine are 2 years apart as well. I have 11, 13, and 15 now. Oh, wow. So like when during the whole time you were doing this work as a lecturer, actually that's when your kids were pretty young when you started, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first semester when I taught that small class, that's when David, our eldest son, was born.
Was
So that
born.
was
Yeah.
20
Like
years ago.
2007, right? Yeah, 2006, 2006 or
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So how, well, as many of our audience are parents, most of them mothers probably following my account, but fathers too who care about education. I wonder, how do you apply this as a busy parent and of course somebody developing a big career yourself? Because you mentioned that example of I think most parents are probably most triggered in the setting at home, right? Because you're usually, especially for mothers, I think because you have a whole day of work, you come back and most of the housework you have to do as well. And then you hope that everything goes as planned, right? Or your kids are doing what they're supposed to do. But usually as kids, they don't do what they are supposed to do. So all the plan kind of got thrown apart. So last year I wrote my book as well, talking about how do we still bring laughter into parenting
Mm,
because for many of us, once we start parenting, it feels like it's such an ordeal, right? Like it's painful every day. You have to deal with it every day, and then you kind of lost the original sort of intention of having kids. But I'm sure that's still very hard. Actually, in your other book, you talk about education as well. So, any advice you want to share with parents who have one kid or multiple, trying to be happy, not
yeah.
only for themselves, also as a parent for their children.
Yeah. So yes, there are a few things, and first of all, as parents, we're always learning. There is no such thing as a perfect parent. I remember when David was 6, I spoke to a friend of mine, one of my best friends. Her name is Shirley, and she's a child psychologist. And whenever I have questions or concerns about children, I go to her. So we meet for lunch one day, and David is 6, and I say to her, Shirley, I wish I had known what I know today 6 years ago. I wouldn't have made all those mistakes. And she said to me, Tal, don't worry, you would have made other mistakes.
There were a lot
And
more
uh,
mistakes you'll make.
and that's important to know. Why? Because we as parents, our goal is not to be perfect parents. Our goal is to be good enough parents. And the idea of a good enough mother, and it applies as much to fathers as well, the idea of being a good enough mother was introduced by a British child psychologist named Donald Winnicott. And Donald Winnicott said that our children don't need perfect parents, they need good enough parents. Why? Because what would a perfect parent do? A perfect parent would always be calm. A perfect parent would always know exactly what to say. A perfect parent would never lose it. A perfect parent would always be able to support the child in the best possible way. That's what we all aspire to, right? But now think about it. Would a perfect parent, as the one I just described, prepare a child for real life? Absolutely not. Why? Because real life is not perfect. If we're lucky, real life is good enough.
Right.
So the first thing we need to do as parents is, take off this desire or pretense to be perfect. Yes, to improve. Yes, to learn. Yes, to love, of course, and to make mistakes and then learn from them. Now, the minute I really internalized this idea of good enough, what it did to me is, first of all, take the pressure off. And it made me a better parent. So that's one thing. Second, and that's very important with parenting. And, this is advice that I need to give more to American parents rather than Chinese parents. But more and more, I see this problem also in China or Korea or Japan. I didn't see it in the past. I see it more and more. And that is that parents are overprotective
Mhm.
of their children. You know, Children, in order to grow, in order to become independent, in order to become strong, they need to struggle. They need to experience hardship. Now, does that mean that parents just are completely hands off? No. Parents need to support where they absolutely have to. But where they can, they need to be hands off. They need to let children make mistakes. They need to let children fall down and get up again. Protect them from danger, of course. But as much as possible, let them make their mistakes. Let them struggle. Let them fall down and get up. That's how we learn how to walk. That's how we learn how to talk, by making mistakes, by falling down. That's how we learn healthy relationships, by making mistakes, by experiencing conflict with our friends and then resolving them by ourselves. Parents, as much as possible, need to be hands off. Now, we see this problem around the world for different reasons. One reason we see it in the United States, for instance, is that parents are overprotective because they can be. So the child has a problem in school with a teacher, they're there intervening. The child is struggling in a class, they're there, you know, mounting all the help that the child needs. Not struggle, we'll get you all the help you need, because they equate happiness with pleasure. And if the child is experiencing pain, that means they're unhappy. That means we need to intervene, because our goal as parents is to make our children happy. Now, as I said, in China, it's less of a problem than in the US, but in China, there's another problem. And that is that often you have one child with so many adults swooning, taking care of that child. Now, that's wonderful and also potentially harmful, because the child doesn't learn to take care of themselves. And children need that.
Yeah.
So sometimes the best thing we can do for our children is nothing. Stay away. Let them develop. Let them make their mistakes. Let them fall. Let them grow.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to respond to the first point you mentioned in talking about be a good enough parent. Um, I I think it's um, so the most, as you said, because we are sure to make mistakes. You will, like even now, I'm sure now people, with younger children look at you and say, oh, your experience, your kids are already 20. But I'm sure this is Tal's first time being a father of a 20-year-old, right? So he will continue to make more mistakes as as a parent of a older child. Um, so the one thing really inspired me is saying the most important in skill a parent should have is not to make no mistakes, but learning how to fix it once you make it, right? So because that you for sure 100% you will use it because you will mess things up. You will be wrong. How do you fix it? I actually quoted in my book as well, saying like, those are the skills we are not taught because we assume we'll go out and make no mistakes, like then, or we'll aspire to be the perfect one, but nobody can be. But then we don't learn the skill to fix things, to repair things. And then those are things that's more important. And I think that's very powerful. And then the second thing about children need to struggle, frankly, in China, I see two extremes. Like one extreme, as you say, is the more protective ones, and they loading resource onto their children, and then they equate pleasure to happiness. The other extreme is almost also misinterpreting what you're saying. So, oh, since they need to struggle, me being tough to them or me being cruel to them is their gift. Okay, so because I need to send you to school that's very strict because real world is tough. Like why don't you just go? Because then I'm preparing you the best by giving you the harsh conditions. And then that's actually there are a lot of bad news recently about child abuse. I mean, in the way not only sometimes mental, sometimes physical. So it's two extremes, but all kind of taking it wrong, right? One is they all kind of stem from the same place of love, you could argue, right? So I love them, But there's one branch go say, okay, then I just load my resources on you. I'll be there all the time. The other saying, okay, me being tough for you is preparing you for the future. But it's hard to be in the center place. What's your advices on that? Like, what are like it's very easy to see parents go sideways, um, on dealing with this.
Yeah. So again, I go back to the ancient sages. It was both Confucius and Aristotle who talked about the golden mean.
Hmm.
In Confucianism, I think it's called Zhongyong,
Yeah.
which is finding moderation, finding the middle between two extremes. Whether you're raising children or whether it applies to your diet, um, we need to find moderate. Now, how do we find it? We find it through experimentation. We find it through making mistakes and learning from them. And that's why what you said earlier, the most important ability of a parent, and by the way, not just a parent, also a manager, also a partner in a relationship. It's not knowing what's perfect. It's learning from mistakes. One of the sentences that I repeat over and over again, whether it's in my classes, whether it's to my children, whether it's to my clients, is learn to fail or fail to learn. Learn to fail or fail to learn. We need to be prepared for making mistakes. We need to learn to apologize when we make mistakes and then to fix, to do better next time. And that's how we develop. And you're absolutely right. Too many parents are taking parenting to the extreme. Either providing their children very little love and affection and appreciation, or showering with them with only love, appreciation, and not having any demands. And parents need to be demanding. I'm all for children struggling. And it's okay to struggle in school and it's okay to struggle in your relationships. At the same time, parents, children need to always know, not even feel of course, but also know that their parents have always got their backs and support them and love them no matter what.
Hmm.
And it's this synthesis, the yin and the yang, this synthesis is so critical for healthy parenting. Now, is it 30% and 70%? Is it 60-40? It depends. I often, my wife and I often joke about this, and we have three children. And I look at them and I say, they're so different. It's hard to believe that they're from the same production line. Um, because, with, one child, what we as parents needed to do was as much as possible keep away and as much as possible support and tell that child you don't need to work so hard. It's okay. You don't want to go to school. You don't need to go to school. Why? Because that child is a perfectionist and does everything to the extreme. Too little recovery. With the other child, the opposite. Get up now. You're going to school. No, you can't stay home. Start working. So we needed very different approaches to different children. And that's okay because they're entitled to be different and they're entitled to posing us with different challenges. We as parents need to be attentive. There is no one size fits all when it comes to education in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm laughing. And thank you for sharing those examples because I think that also part of Like even last night, I'm having this conversation with my third, because I have boys, two boys and a girl. My girl is 11, she's the youngest. And she was saying, Mama, I was the best, right? I was like, why? Or I said, because you had me last because you made all the mistakes with my all the other brothers. I was like, that's right. We learn from, mistakes, the things that didn't work out. And I was like, yeah, so that's why I'm your favorite. You had me last. I was like, I can't argue with that. But they're mine three are very different too. They're very different. Yeah, it's like they have you but the minute you think, okay, now I've got it. I mastered how to, parent a 15-year-old, and then you realize, oh, the other one is completely different, has different problems.
Yes. That's one thing that children do is they keep us humble.
Right, exactly. You're getting cocky? Oh, let me show you.
Yes.
Exactly. But I think all the skills you mentioned in your book are actually so useful, because at the end of the day, I think, of course, everybody, I'm sure you and your wife do the same. You realize all the issues are not with the children, it's with yourself, right? So like it's your expectations and your tendency that you have to be aware of and kind of rewire yourself to get prepared for this. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I want to have a bit of time to touch on your other book. I think that book is full of like a gold mine as well. So that book's Chinese name is called 幸福的方法. The English name is Happier: Learn the Secrets to Daily Joy and Lasting Fulfillment. And then in that book, I think there are two topics that really touched me when I was reading. One is this relationship of happiness and success. I think I want to talk about it because people oftentimes feel like, oh, I can't be happy because success is hard work. It's a tough world, right? So like only you fluffy people can talk about happiness. But I think you have this beautiful um, chapters of your book talk about how is the relationship actually different, how happiness is related to real wealth, and success. And the second one is this whole point about emotional bankruptcy, right? When you talk about the world, when you talk about GDP and all that, I think both those two are so timely as well. And although you're not writing this for the Chinese audience, but I can see so many examples that fits what you describe. Yeah, can we spend the last 20 minutes or so on these two topics? Maybe start with
Yeah.
the first one around success and happiness. I'll just put in one more thing, for people who probably didn't know or didn't read the book yet, but please do get a copy of the book. Tao himself was some of the major champion of racquetball, right? When you were 16. So you were actually quite successful. Maybe we start from there. Like, how do you start thinking about success and happiness?
Yeah. So, growing up, my biggest passion was squash. Squash is basically, you take a
Gosh,
tennis court and you fold
yes.
it into two. Um, and I remember, when I was 16 years old, thinking, what am I going to do with my life when I no longer have squash? I really could not see any other path my life would take. So squash was my big passion. But at the same time, even though I was playing and playing a lot, I was not a happy child. I was actually an anxious child. I constantly felt whether when I was practicing or when I was studying, I always felt a knot in my stomach, being under pressure and stress. But then I would tell myself, don't worry, Tal, because when you become a champion, when you win, I lived in Israel then, when you win the Israeli national championships, then you'll be happy. Then this knot will go away and you can live happily ever after. And year after year, that's what I would tell myself through difficulties and hardships and challenges and struggles. And then I won eventually. I won the tournament and I was ecstatic. I mean, I was, tears of joy came out and I thought I made it. Now I'm ready to be happy. And I was so happy for the next 4 hours. And shockingly, The same knot in my stomach that I literally had for years just came back as if I hadn't fulfilled my biggest dream. And I was shocked. I couldn't believe that this was happening. And I cried again, but this time not tears of joy, but I was completely lost. But then I had the solution and I said, oh, it's because it's just the Israeli national championship. I need to win the world championship and then I'll really be happy. And I started working towards that. And I became better and better. And I never did become the world champion, but I became an international level player and won tournaments. And every time I won, it did make me happy for a few hours, if I was lucky for a few days, and then back again. And then I replaced the dream of becoming a great squash player with the dream of getting into Harvard. And I thought when I get into Harvard, then I'll really be happy forever. And I was so happy when I got in. And it lasted a few weeks. And I started to realize that I was misleading myself, and millions, if not billions, of people around the world were misleading themselves. That the path to happiness is through success. And later on, when I started to study psychology and focus on positive psychology, I also saw the research and realized that it's an illusion that billions of people around the world are misled by, the illusion that success leads to happiness. It doesn't. It does lead to a temporary high sometimes, but it's just temporary. And I started to study while at Harvard, the relationship between success and happiness. And very quickly, I found out that it wasn't success that leads to happiness, but rather it's the other way around. It's happiness that leads to success. If you increase levels of well-being, even by a little bit, you will become, all other things being equal, you will become more successful. Your thinking will be clearer. Your ability to be creative and innovative will improve. You will work better in teams. You will perform better, whether as a business person or a teacher or a coach or a student in school. So it's not that success leads to happiness, it's rather that happiness leads to success. Moreover, how do we measure real success in our life? Up until now, I've been talking about traditional success, getting to a good university, maybe make a lot of money, buy a big home, progress at work, attain fame and fortune. That's how we in our modern society measure success. And we believe that this kind of success will actually lead us to happiness. That's why parents push their children so hard to succeed in school so that they can get into a good university. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not against hard work. In fact, I demand my children work hard. But seriously, I don't care about their grades. I want them to work hard. Specifically, I want them to work hard at the things that they're passionate about. So, for my daughter, it's academic work. For my eldest son, it's basketball. Now, he still has to do well in school, but he can do moderately well. He needs to pass, of course. But the key is that he works hard at the things that make him happy. And for him, it's basketball. For the youngest child, it's, cybersecurity. They follow their bliss. Each child is different. Same production line, different personality. How do we measure success? What do parents really want for their children? Well, if you think about it, what they really want for their children is for their children to be happy. It's only they're misguided and they believe that if they get into a top university or make a lot of money, then they'll be happy. But that's not the case. They'll be happy if they follow their passions, if they find things that are meaningful to them, if they learn to cultivate healthy, supportive relationships, if they find things that they can learn and study and develop throughout their lives, if they regularly exercise, if they maybe engage in some form of mindfulness practice. In other words, if they engage with the S.P.I.R.E elements. And that, to me, attaining this happiness is the ultimate success.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's so true. And then people equate, what do you say, attaining fame and fortune as a way to happiness. But actually, part of it is also like the blindness or the selective blindness of a human being, because there's so many stories of people with fame and fortune that's not happy, right? But we tend to ignore them. It's like, okay, let's look at the ones that are successful. So in a way, going back to one of the S.P.I.R.E elements, I think the middle one, the intellect, is often neglected because people will say, oh, happiness is all about emotion, right? It's all about psychology. No, it's about critical thinking. It's about looking
Exactly.
at all the facts and the entire data set and saying like, what does the data really tell us, right?
Yeah.
So, but oftentimes I think we're so it's not only misguided, but also I think the reason the misguidance is so powerful is that there is a bias in our own mind. Like we choose to believe or enlarge certain sample sets more than others. Like, it's easier to say, okay, this is your Harvard degree. And then maybe even people would say to you, well, Tal, you can talk about this because you went to Harvard, right? And then if you didn't go to Harvard, like then you didn't have this impact. Like you cannot come back and criticize it. So people would take those arguments and dismiss what you just said. But if I were to pose this challenge to you, Tels, people would say, I'm sure you got those questions as well. Well, you went to Harvard yourself, right? How do
Yeah.
you say that's not important?
Yeah. So, my children say that to me. Um, so yes, I've heard it before. And my answer to that is the following. And I say this to them. I said, if the majority of Harvard students were happy, believe me, I would be the first one to push you to get into Harvard or a top university. But we know that that's not the case. The majority of students in Peking or Tsinghua or MIT or Oxford and Cambridge, the majority of students there are not happy. The majority of wealthy people around the world are not happy. Why? Because these are not the things that lead to happiness. Who is happy? That person who's studying the thing that she's passionate about. And again, that could be studying Japanese or marketing. Who is happy? It's the person who spends quality time with his best friend or family. It's the person who has taken up some form of mindfulness practice and spends, 10 minutes a day or an hour and a half, 3 times a week, focusing on the here and now. These are the people who are happy. Whether they go to a top university or not, whether they are multi-billionaires or just getting by. Now, I'm not advocating poverty. I'm not advocating laziness. I do advocate hard work, and I certainly think that people should work as hard as they need to in order to fulfill their basic needs and their family's basic needs. But beyond basic needs, the rest is bonus. Nice to have, not necessary.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think, sometimes in our mental analysis, they will say, oh, if I don't go to Harvard, it means I will live poor. No, there's a lot in between. Most of the people can lead a decent life, and then have enough material, right? And then being happy doesn't mean you don't have it. So I think that's also sometimes we're in this sort of thinking trap, as if I'm posing something, I'm going to the opposite. No, you're not. And then thank you for advocating that. Yeah. And then the last one in this whole, I think it's the later part of the happiness book around emotional bankruptcy. I really love it. And that's where also you talked about how we basically measure our world, how we are doing. And then we're missing this part. Can you elaborate a bit on that to our audience?
Yeah. So one of the exercises that I talk about in the book is based on the questioning style of a child. So children are generally curious. We're born curious.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a statement by the American educator Neil Postman, who said, "Children come into schools as question marks, and they leave as periods."
Finished.
And yeah, and because at school you mostly learn that you need to come up with the answer. Well, I go back to Confucius. Questions is what matters most. So one of the questioning approaches of children is what I call the infinitely regressive why.
Mm.
So they always, they ask you a question and you tell them, and they said why. You give an answer to that question, another why, and another why, and another why. They go on and on and on. So what if we applied the infinitely regressive why to our goals and objectives in life? So let's take an example. So, you know, I want to be a banker. Why? Well, because bankers make a lot of money. Why do you want to make a lot of money? Because then I'll be able to buy a big house and a beautiful car and beautiful shoes and clothes. Why do you want to buy beautiful shoes and clothes and a big house and a fast car? Because then people will respect me and admire me. Why do you want people to respect and admire? And every time you say them, you always ask the why. Eventually, always, you will get to the following answer. Why do I want this? Because it will make me happy. And when you get to that answer, there is no why after that. It's the final answer. Why? Because happiness, not prestige, not success, not money, happiness is the ultimate currency. The currency by which we take measure of our life. And given that the ultimate currency is not money, not prestige, not success, given that the ultimate currency is happiness, and given that there is so much unhappiness in our world today, there's a lot of material wealth in our world today, but there is a lot of unhappiness to match that. Given that we as a society are facing emotional bankruptcy in the ultimate currency, the currency of happiness.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's why the first the chapter 4 of that book, again, you can get a copy of the book. I think that's exactly how you named it, called the ultimate currency, which is very eye-opening when I first read it, because we tend to look at certain measures of the world, right? So yeah, of course, there's the World Bank that release, the global economy index. We look at GDP growth, we look at all that, and but that I think we look at because we have this big assumption is that the more growth, the happier we are, right? Or the bigger the number, the better we are. But actually, as you said, if we were honest to ourselves as a species, if we have a measure of looking at, the ultimate currency, you're using that as a measurement, we may get a very different answer. And again, that doesn't mean like we're going backwards, we're going to like the
Exactly.
farmland. No, you're just saying that yes, economic growth is a good thing, but it's not sufficient, right? So like, how do we take a different alternative view of us, like our collective being,
Yes.
right? But then how do we do like and I think you talk about with all the data we can see that currency we have this deficiency. We look at the youth depression or even adult depression and how our mental status have been. But looking at those data, I think it eventually comes back to what do we do, right? So I think again that goes back to all the decades of your work, is saying, if we have this awareness of, okay, this is the alternative way of looking at our status quo, then how do we go from there? Maybe I use that as the last question.
Yeah. So first of all, just to clarify, as you pointed out, just like I'm not against hard work and ambition and success on the individual level, I'm not against measuring GDP and increasing wealth and healthy and effective economic policies. Of course, I'm for all those. And at the same time, what we need to understand it is, as you pointed out, that's not enough. We need, in addition to thinking about microeconomics and macroeconomics, we need to think about micro happiness and macro happiness. And this is exactly what we focus on in our programs, whether it's the certificate in happiness studies or the master's degree in happiness studies or the research that we will conduct in our PhD program. How do you introduce micro happiness interventions in individual lives, in relationships, in families? How do we introduce macro happiness interventions in our schools, in our organizations, in our society? And ultimately, that's what it comes down to: education. You know, I mentioned earlier today my teacher, one of my mentors, Professor Martin Seligman.
Yeah.
And when Martin Seligman speaks with parents and teachers, with educators, he very often begins with two questions. The first question he asks is the following: what would you most want for your children? And parents or teachers would say, I want my child to be happy, or, I want my child to have good relationships, or I want my child to be resilient and independent, or, I want my child to be, curious and kind. And he makes a list of all the things that parents want for their children. And then he says, okay, this is question number one, that list. Question number two, second list. What do children learn in school? And they learn language and math and geography and history and biology, and the list goes on. And there is almost no overlap between the two lists. And that's a problem. Now, it's not that list number two is unimportant. Of course, it's important to teach children how to read and write and to do math and to know their history. Of course, that's important. However, why are schools largely ignoring the first list, especially today? when we have a science of happiness. You know, that wasn't the case 50 years ago. Today it is. We know how to help children become happier. We know how to help parents become better parents. And you said it earlier, you know, and I asked this in my workshop. How many of you have had a math course in your life? Everyone puts their hand up. How many of you have had a writing course? Everyone puts their hands up. How many of you have had parenting courses? How many of you had relationship courses? How many of you have had a course on happiness?
Zero.
Way, way too few. And that's what we need to change on the macro level. The government, businesses, schools, all of us are responsible for introducing the science of happiness, whether it's through education, whether it's through the media, whether it's through books, and any way possible. Introduce the science of happiness. So just like children learn how to read and write and do basic math, they learn those skills. They also learn the skills of happiness, resilience, relationships, and so on.
So thank you so much. So like I know you're doing this work. Do you mind saying a few things about your academy, like the Happiness Studies Academy? I'm very curious. I think many are curious too. Like what kind of like how do one participate, for example? Like if I'm interested in this, how do I interact with the academy?
Yeah, so at the Happiness Studies Academy, which is the website, happinessstudies.academy, you can find access to our year-long certificate program. We have many students from China. In fact, all our courses are translated into Chinese. Um, and as part of that program, we go back and read the ancients. Again, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Aristotle, and Plato. And we gain access to the latest research in the field of positive psychology and neuroscience. So it's an interdisciplinary approach to the good life. We have students who are interested in coaching or therapy, who are managers in organizations, who want to lead happier lives and who want to become better parents. So we cover all these topics. In addition, we also have a master's degree in happiness studies. This is not translated into Chinese, unlike the certificate program. However, we have many students from China who are participating in the program because all of our programs are 100% online.
Absolutely. Well, with that, thank you so much, Tal, for your time. I know you're staying up very late for this interview, and then thank you for bringing all the wisdom, the knowledge to our audience. And I hope many people can find you as well, not only through your books and also through Happiness Studies Academy. And then let's bring more emotional currency to the world together.
Thank you very much, Ian, for this and for all the important work that you do.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.